Welcome back to Racing Rundown. On this video, we are going to be previewing the 2022 Dubai World Cup. This race is very, very exciting, and this whole Dubai World Cup Carnival card of 8 thoroughbred races, very, very exciting. If you haven't checked out this week's episode of the Racing Rundown podcast, episode number 151, we went full in-depth on this entire card, all 8 races, or I shouldn't say the entire card, all 8 of the thoroughbred races. I'll have a link down below in the description, so if you haven't checked that out, you can go check it out. Racing Rundown is a podcast on every podcast platform that is out there, so wherever you get your podcast, you can find us at on here. However, before we get started, I do have one final minor housekeeping note. As I'm sure American racing viewers are aware of, we are in full swing of the Kentucky Derby Trail 100-point preps do kick off this weekend. The UAE Derby, actually earlier on this card, is also being run on Saturday, but the big race is the Louisiana Derby. We have a preview for that on Racing Rundown. Link will also be below in the description to that race. My co-host Eric did a preview of that race in the traditional style of previews that we usually do, or the way that we usually do this stuff on Racing Rundown. I'm doing this a little bit different than the way that we normally do previews. Normally, the way I do previews is usually we talk about every single horse, and I give you the upside, the downside with them. But you know who the big horse in the Dubai World Cup is. I don't need to tell you who that is. Of course, it's Life is Good. The reason that I'm doing it this different way is because Life is Good is, of course, a heavy favorite. And if you haven't listened to Racing Rundown already this week, I will inform you that both myself and also on the podcast, Eric, my co-host, did decide that we were going to pick against Life is Good. So, you know, if you're someone who is kind of disheartened by this race, and especially if you're playing it in a U.S. market, knowing that Life is Good is going to be such a heavy favorite, and that you're thinking, you know, there's not really going to be a whole lot of opportunity to make money in this race because Life is Good's going to absolutely run everybody off their feet here. I'm here to give you reasons why that may not necessarily be the case. I should preface this, though, and I do want to recognize that Life is Good does absolutely have a chance to win this race. So I'm not, you know, just doing this kind of hot take type video to say, oh, Life is Good's got no shot here. No, Life is Good is a supremely talented racehorse, and when you have a horse as talented as Life is Good, he's got a lot of stuff going, a lot of red marks against him in this race. But Life is Good could just be so otherworldly that he's just able to overcome everything and go on to win this race. I'll get into why I think he can lose this race and all that, but I do want to say that it is certainly possible that Life is Good is just so much better than everybody else here. And that's the way a lot of people are looking at this race, and I understand perfectly why people are looking at this race that way, because Life is Good really up to this point hasn't done anything wrong in his career. But I don't want to waste any more time. I do want to just quickly take a look at the full field. So now going over to the 11 horses that are entered for this race, I'm going to give the horses that I'm not really going to be talking about too much on this video. I'm going to just throw those horses out right now. So Aero Trim is coming out of an okay run in the Saudi Cup. I don't really like to pick horses based off of efforts that they ran in that race, or at that racetrack in Saudi Arabia. The nickname that I have for that racetrack is Groundhog Day. It's pretty much the kind of thing, if you run good over it, great. If you don't, I usually toss out bad efforts there. Chua Wizard ran a very good race in the Dubai World Cup last year, but I think Chua Wizard's coming up against a bit of a tougher field than he did last year. Grosser Jack, he's going to be one of the longest shots in the race. I don't really see him being able to step up and beat a field of this kind. Remorse, the 11, I'll talk about him a little bit when we get to hypothetical, but he's another horse that I would say that he wasn't able to beat hypothetical last time. The field's tougher here. Good enough horse when he's running in local races at Maidan, but going up against some of the best in the world, no thanks, really. And then the Godolphin, the first of the 2 Godolphin horses that I'll mention, Real World. I don't think Real World is particularly bad, but I don't think he can win this race. But I'm not completely tossing him because I think he will have some kind of a say in the way that this race plays out. But I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So now let's get into the big horse, Life is Good. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you what he's done in the United States. He has been close to perfect. If it wasn't for a questionable ride in the Alan Jerkins at Saratoga, I believe Life is Good would have won the Alan Jerkins Stakes. And I say that as someone who picked Jackie's Warrior there. So, and someone who thinks very highly of Jackie's Warrior. So that's a tall accomplishment, or that's a tall compliment for me to give to a horse like Life is Good. Obviously, a Breeders' Cup winner. He was brilliant in his Breeders' Cup race, and the Pegasus World Cup last time out, the race that everybody's talking about from Life is Good. There have been so many superlatives that have come out since that race, and I've not really agreed with many of them. And that's a hot take to say, and I understand that it's a hot take to say. But let's take a look at the chart from the Pegasus World Cup for a second. So this is a race that I think a lot of people, because of the circumstances of the race, it got a little bit blown out in terms of how people are viewing this race. So Life is Good won this race by 3 1/4 lengths over Knicks Go. What was the billing for this race the entire week? It was that this was basically just going to be a match race, that these two horses were going to run with each other for 9 furlongs, and the best one was going to win the race. Obviously, that didn't happen, but why did that not happen? The reason that I've been saying on Racing Rundown for the last 2 months is that Joao Rosario in the first quarter mile of the race got a little bit cute and tried to play around and didn't do the tactic that would have won him, or not necessarily won him the race, but put him in a better position to win. And that was immediately send Knicks Go to the front end. And, I don't know whether or not it was a factor, a combination of that he didn't immediately gun Knicks Go to the front end, which he didn't do. And also the fact that Stiletto Boy kind of took the position that Knicks Go wanted to sit away from him and kind of took Knicks Go out of his element there. I think it's a combination of both of those factors. But what ended up happening? What was the result of that? Irad Ortiz gunned Life is Good immediately and got the early positioning set up about 4 lengths. And, going down the backside, it was anywhere between 3 to almost 5 lengths, how much he was in front of the field by. So Irad Ortiz, credit to him. He put his horse immediately, no screwing around, right in the perfect position to win the race. And that's why he won the Pegasus World Cup, because he was put in the early part of the race in the place where he needed to be to win the race. And he put the distance on the field, again, almost 5 lengths. Officially, 4.5 lengths. That was at the various poles in the race, 3/4, and at the head of the stretch, pretty close to 5 lengths, I would imagine there at some points in the race. But point being, Life is Good was in front. And at that point, Joao Rosario on Knicks Go, once Life is Good is 4 or 5 lengths in front of him, you can't send Knicks Go up after Life is Good at that point, because that's just an invitation to run 7th in there. And once Life is Good had the positioning in the race, it was over. And I knew it was over once Life is Good was in front at quarter mile into the race. Eric knew it was over. Pretty much everybody else who was watching the race knew it was over. And again, this is all stuff you don't need me to tell you. This is stuff that you watch the race with your own eyes and you can say, yeah, that race is over. However, the thing that's been really concerning for me is watching the stretch run of the Pegasus World Cup. And this is where I differ from everybody else. And once again, I think a lot of the fact that everybody loves the Pegasus World Cup so much is that it comes down to the fact that he finished by daylight in front of Knicks Go, a horse that the entire week we thought they were going to run down the stretch the entire way with each other. So I think the fact that Life is Good beat him by daylight, it kind of gave people the indication that Life is Good was that much better than Knicks Go in this particular race, which I don't necessarily think Life is Good was that much better than Knicks Go in this race. I think, like I said, the positioning of the race won him. The positioning of him early in the race won him this race. But the other thing about Life is Good is he was getting tired down the stretch of this race. And, you may say, well, does that really matter? In the Pegasus World Cup, no, it didn't, because getting tired in there means instead of winning by 5 lengths, he only wins by 3 1/4 lengths. But in a race like the Dubai World Cup, and that's what we have to remember, this race in Dubai is 2,000 meters. It's about 10 furlongs, give or take. A lot of people in the United States are going to say 1 mile and a quarter. I'm going to say 2,000 meters because it's not exactly 1 mile and a quarter, but for all intent and purposes, this is 1 mile and a quarter race. And 1 mile and a quarter at Meydan, or 2,000 meters at Meydan, is a lot different than 1 mile and an eighth at Gulfstream. So, that's where I start to get a little bit concerned when I see this. And the thing with Life is Good is Life is Good was drifting down the stretch. And you can tell that he was drifting because at the 16th pole, Irad Ortiz is still giving him the whip right-handed. He's just showing him it, but he's giving the horse the whip right-handed, which is telling me one thing. He's drifting, which means the horse is tired. And if he was getting tired when he had the pace up front really all his own way, then that makes me a little bit concerned, given that there is other speed in this race. And a lot of people are going to say, well, there's no speed that can keep up with him in this race. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. But just to reiterate myself, as you can see there, Irad Ortiz is giving him the whip at the 16th pole just to kind of keep his mind on his business, which, again, Good thing to do to minimize the fact that the horse was drifting out. But it's no secret he was drifting there. He was also drifting at the end of his run in the San Felipe back in 2021 at Santa Anita when he was still with Bob Baffert. But once again, he was so far in front in that race, it didn't really matter. And if you're looking at it from the perspective of Nick's Go, not to keep relitigating the Pegasus, but if you're looking at it from the perspective of Nick's Go, Life is Good came back to him, but he didn't come back to him enough with enough time in the race. And Pete Aiello said it in the race call. Nick's Go just had too much to do. That's why Life is Good won the Pegasus, because he was able to establish himself that early position. And then by the time he came to the stretch, when he was getting a little bit tired, he was so far in front, it didn't matter. So now it's time to get into the pace scenario of the Dubai World Cup. Now, a lot of people have been saying that they just think that Life is Good is going to go out there and establish himself early, get a 3 to 4 length lead on the field, and it's going to be over because, as I just showed you in the Pegasus World Cup, you give Life is Good that much ground early on in the race, it's over. You're not going to be able to get up to him. Even if he does start to come back to you, he's just going to establish himself that much farther ahead of you, and you're not going to be able to cut into the margin. But the big thing that differs from me and everybody else is I don't think Life is Good as a horse that you absolutely can't keep up with. Now, why am I saying this? And I'm going to give a news flash out here. I'm not saying it just because Jackie's Warrior kept up with him in the Alan Jerkins, because that's obviously a completely different race. Jackie's Warrior is another worldly, in terms of speed talent racehorse, just like Life is Good is. But the reason I'm saying that I think horses can keep up with him is look at what happened in the Breeders' Cup. I mean, there were far lesser horses keeping up with him in the Breeders' Cup. The two Japanese horses, Jasper Prince and Ping Zhan, and also 8 Rings. Those 3 horses, now, they weren't running stride for stride with Life is Good. And that's the big thing that I would like to clarify on my position here is I don't think horses are going to be going out there trying to run stride for stride with Life is Good, but I don't think you have to do that in order to beat Life is Good. I think you just have to make sure that Irad Ortiz is not able to give Life is Good a breather down the backside. And, in the Breeders' Cup, it didn't matter because, they were going a 2-turn mile and it was a distance that was well within Life is Good's comfort zone. But the Japanese horses, Ping Zhan and Jasper Prince, and 8 Rings, they were able to keep up with Life is Good in the earlier part of the race. And so the way I'm looking at that is if those horses, which, especially 8 Rings, 8 Rings was within a length and a half of Life is Good in the Breeders' Cup. If those 2 horses can keep up with him in the early part of the race, I don't see why a horse like Hypothetical or Hot Rod Charlie can't keep up with Life is Good in this race. And now I'll get into those horses. Now, I want to talk about Hypothetical first. I'm going to show the replay of Hypothetical's win in the local prep for this race, the round 3 of the Al Maktoum Challenge, which is a Group 1 race there. Hypothetical is a horse that needs to be on the front end in his races, and Hypothetical was the pace setter in the Dubai World Cup last year. And in this race, he's breaking from the outside post here, as you can see. He's breaking from, or not the exact outside post, but he's breaking from farther out here. And Hypothetical has to get to the lead in this point. And it's not necessarily easy. There are horses in there. One of those horses in the black silks with a white stripe by the shoulders, that's Everfast, who you might remember from his runner-up effort in a Preakness 3 years ago in 2019. But the point is that they're not making it easy on Hypothetical to get up to the front end in this race, but Hypothetical's doing it anyway. I'm going to touch on Trackus numbers also in a few minutes, but I, just wanted to demonstrate here that Hypothetical's keeping up with him. Moving on to Hot Rod Charlie. Why can Hot Rod Charlie keep up with him? Well, this horse has elite gate speed. Now I'm going to throw in the opening quarter of the Belmont Stakes last year. And remember back after the Belmont Stakes to talk about Hot Rod Charlie. And this is a horse that had just run second to Essential Quality. But the way people were talking about him after the Belmont Stakes, you would have thought that Hot Rod Charlie had just won the Belmont Stakes with how many superlatives were being thrown around at this horse. But the point of why that matters for this race is Hot Rod Charlie ran the fastest opening quarter mile in the history of the Belmont Stakes. And the horse who had run the fastest time before him ended up pulling up in the Belmont Stakes. So that gives you a perspective as to how fast Hot Rod Charlie was going there. I'll get into the Trackus numbers a little bit, but this will just to give the indication without getting into raw numbers of the speed the horses were going of what Hot Rod Charlie and / Hypothetical were doing. Now, Midnight Bourbon, I don't think is quite as fast as Life is Good. And, getting down to the other horse that I think could potentially at least factor in the early pace scenario is Real World, but I don't think Real World is going to be the kind of horse that is up there pressing Life is Good. I think the most that Real World is going to do is sit off of a Hot Rod Charlie or a Midnight Bourbon and keep those horses honest and make sure that they're keeping Life is Good honest. And I've said this to people who've asked me this. I don't need Life is Good to, or I'm sorry, I don't need a horse to go out there and keep up with Life is Good stride for stride. I just need someone to go out there and make sure Life is Good is running fast enough that he's getting, he's going those fast, those 22s, maybe those 46s. If we're just purely converting these to American half mile, quarter mile times, that he's running those races and that he's getting tired. And the other thing is I need to make sure that they're not giving him, the horses need to not give Life is Good a 3-4 length break, because if they give him that, it's over. So now we'll get to the raw numbers for this race. I have a spreadsheet that I made for this race that you're looking at right now, and I also have trackage charts with the fractions and the actual speed that the horses were going of the 4 horses that I think are going to be at least pace contenders. I didn't bother factoring in Real World here because, like I said, I don't really think Real World is going to be that much of a pace presence. I think at most he'll sit off of either a Midnight Bourbon or a Hot Rod Charlie and just make sure that they are up right near Life is Good pushing him. But what you're looking at right now on this spreadsheet right here is the actual breakdown of the speed that the horses were going in the respective races. So you have the name of the horse and the race that I pulled these numbers from, and this speed is in miles per hour. I will mention, though, as you can probably tell with hypothetical, I did put the speed that he was going in kilometers per hour because it's not an exact right to the conversion of miles per hour that I have there. So it's for the quarter mile, the half mile, the 3/4 of a mile, and the mile, according to track, as these were the numbers that they were going in these specific races. And then their finish is how fast they were going from the mile mark until the finish of the race. And I put in parentheses in the finish column what distance that was, with the exception of the Al Maktoum Challenge because I ran out of room. But I'm going to rough estimate that was about a quarter to a half mile there from the 1,600 meter mark, which was the mile marker, until the it was a quarter mile there from the 1,600 meter mark to the 2,000 meter mark, which is about a quarter of a mile. So that is what all the numbers on this chart mean. Now I want to take a look at the first trackage chart, which is hypothetical. And this is how the raw numbers at the pole of call in terms of the time that he was running: 400, 800, 1,200, 1,600, and then the finish of the race. And then I will go to show you what it looked like at 400 meters in the race, which is the first pole of call in this race. And as you can tell from my spreadsheet, 66.3 miles per hour here. I want to show a couple things earlier. So once again, 66.3 here, just afterwards, 66.2. So a little bit down for hypothetical there. But as I showed you in here, that conversion is about 41 miles per hour. So hypothetical ran a faster first quarter in his round 3 of the Al Maktoum Challenge than Life is Good did in the Pegasus World Cup. Actually, the fastest of all the horses that I pulled data from here. When we get to the half mile pull in all these races, that's where Life is Good sort of kind of starts to distance himself a little bit from most of the other horses in here. 39.2. Hot Rod Charlie, after he went out there, set that really fast opening quarter, Pratt kind of gave him a little bit of a breather down the backside. And that's where you see with Hot Rod Charlie, the numbers go down to about 35 miles per hour here. And then ultimately, they kick it back up when they get towards the stretch of the race. And I will deviate from here slightly. I'll go to look at Life is Good in the Pegasus right now. These are his numbers right now, so you can look at those. But that is how Life is Good is going to win this race if he truly is a horse that's just absolutely made for 2 turns. He's going to go out there, establish his early position, and then Irad Ortiz is going to give him a breather down the backside, and then when they turn for home, he'll have enough left in the tank when he's asked to give his best. That's how that's how Knicks Go won the Whitney last year, and that's also how he won the Breeders' Cup Classic. Established his early position, got the breather down the backside. That's how you win as a speed-dominant horse in a 2-turn race. But obviously, as I've made the contention the whole time, I don't need a horse to go up there and run step for step with Life is Good this entire time. What I need is for them to keep Life is Good honest early in the race. And you see the drop-off in speed from 3/4 of a mile to the mile marker in this race. And I'll go pull it up right here. 3/4 of a mile excuse the load time there, 3/4 of a mile. He was averaging about 38.6 miles per hour. And again, should mention these times are all average for the race. The peak estimate was 41.2 miles per hour. This is about what he averaged for that particular quarter of the race. So 36.3 here. We go down to a mile, and there's going to be the big drop off that I just mentioned. And that's the thing that makes me a little bit concerned. Now, 36.5 miles per hour here, and then he finishes that last eighth of a mile in 33.1 in the Pegasus. So again, that's what the raw numbers in terms of speed say. I don't know how much to read into this. Obviously, I'm reading into it a little bit, but I'm not going to say that this it completely takes Life is Good out of the World Cup. But like I mentioned, I think that these numbers are at least worth looking at. And when I see numbers that are a little bit iffy, it means that I got to go against Life is Good here. So now we'll get into who my pick against Life is Good in this race is, and that horse is going to be Country Grammar. The reason that I'm picking Country Grammar is, number one, he's a Grade 1 winner already at the 1.25 mile distance. So I know that this is something that this horse wants to do, but it's really because of the effort that he had last time in Riyadh in the Saudi Cup. He was coming off a 9-month layoff there. He ran huge. I call that stretch of that race Groundhog Day. It's very weird. Horses can, sink or float there. And the fact that off a 9-month layoff, Country Grammar ran such a huge race in Riyadh tells me that he's going to be ready and ready to go in this race. Two back, really, really like that. I also think he's going to be a pretty decent price in the United States market. He's not going to be a massive price here, but Life is Good's going to be close to odds on, if not odds on. And then I think Hot Rod Charlie will take most of the money of the horses that aren't Country Grammar. So I like the price I'm going to get on him. I like the recent form. If he was able to run as well as he did in Saudi Arabia last time, I can only wonder what he's going to do second back off the layoff. So he's my top pick. For a value horse underneath, there's a couple horses that I think you could go with. I mentioned Chua Wizard a little bit earlier, but I think the big horse for me is Magny Core. Like I said, I don't think Real World is going to go out there and rabbit it this race for Magny Core, but if this race kind of blows up the way I think it could, and I don't think this race is going to blow up, but I think if hypothetical Hot Rod Charlie and Midnight Bourbon are all out there pushing Life is Good, I think they will come back to the field more so than Life is Good will come back to the field. But I think it'll be enough for Magny Core to at least pick up something in this race. So as a value play in here, Magny Core is the horse. Country Grammar's my on-top pick. I don't think Life is Good runs a bad race. I think he'll run a very respectable race, but I think it's just going to come down to he's going to get caught that last quarter. That stretch is long at Meydan. Horses can get run down there. Ask Gunrunner about how long this stretch is in Meydan. Hopefully, I was able to help you out with a little bit here. If you're looking to bet this race outside of Life is Good, then hopefully we're able to give you some tips here. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, subscribe to Racing Rundown, subscribe to our podcast, Racing Rundown Podcast, on whatever podcast platform you consume your podcasts on, and also go check out Eric's preview of the Louisiana Derby. We'll see you next time.